This is Philosophy versus Improv, where two sages try to teach each other a thing or two, and maybe you, the audience, get something out of it as well. I'm Mark Lintonmeyer, taking you through the magical world of philosophy today.
And I am Bill Arnett, standing behind and encouraging you to walk through the world that is improv.
But I have a helper, I have a guide, I have a guru, I have a shaman.
Okay.
That I have brought today. Please introduce yourself, David.
Hi, I'm David Pena Guzman, and I am neither a comedian nor really that much of a philosopher, so I fall somewhere in the middle here. So hello to both of you.
Okay. We're just inviting regular people on. Is that what's happening now, Mark? We're just getting...
I mean, you teach in a professional setting. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're right. I am an academic.
Okay. Okay.
No, so I am a philosopher, so we should say that clearly.
Okay.
But
very
the
modest.
comedic element is missing.
There's
very
the
modest.
Am I a philosopher, and are you really a philosopher?
That's right. You know, if you ask somebody
on.
that question, that's when the knives come out and the profession turns into a blood sport.
I found that, you know, the Professional Philosopher Association means that, you know, yes, I people who belong to that identify as philosophers. People like me who do a lot of philosophy, have philosophy training, you know, whether we would, you know, well, I'm not writing. My one book was very much a secondary source in the philosophy area. So am I a philosopher just because I think about philosophy a lot? Or am I just a philosophy fan? Like, I don't have to actually deal with that. But the fact that you have this, you know, you have your CV, you have your professional presentation, you have to, right? If you're modest and like, oh, but who is really a philosopher? If we're paid, we're merely sophists. You know, you don't want to get into that.
No, that's right. There is a lot of policing of boundaries, I have to say, in the profession. So often people who are outside of academia, you know, are not recognized for the philosophical work that they do. But even within the academy, there is a lot of policing of exactly what kind of philosophy you have to do, what kind of writing style you have to have. And it's something that I've written about professionally as a philosopher, about this bickering and infighting. I know that's not what we're here to talk about today, but maybe there's a connection there between people who are drunk on power and want to call the shots about who is and who is not a philosopher. But I tend to take a very pluralistic, broad interpretation of what philosophy is and what it looks like.
Sure. Well, it's always funny to me when people in kind of, and I'm sorry, philosophy, but I would put you in kind of a niche category when considering all the occupations in the world today.
Not like the mainstream improvers. Okay, go.
I didn't say that, but it's funny when you have people in very narrow groups bickering with each other about. It's like, y'all, come on, it's like, get together. There aren't many of you left. Let's you know, on the same team here.
The tyranny of small differences, we might say.
Okay.
Well, and as you have often pressed on us, Bill, and we say this to, you know, folks like yourself, David, who have not. Well, I don't know. Did you ever have to do improv in a class, in a high school, in anything like that?
I had to do not improv in the theatrical sense of the term, but I did have to do impromptu speaking when I was a member of the high school speech and debate team, when I was my nerdy 15, 16-year-old self, which is a kind of improvisational style of oratory where you're given a topic, you're given a minute to gather your thoughts, and then you have to give a 5 to 7 minute speech on the spot. So I did that, but, you know, it takes out all the fun because it's nerds competing in regional circuits, talking about politics. So that's the kind of improv that I did back in the day.
Okay. Did you coin the tyranny of differences, by the way?
You know, I think
differences?
I think I was trying to pull a term that I heard somewhere else and I couldn't remember the actual term. So I do think I just invented that accidentally.
The tyranny of small differences, Mark. Write that down.
Well,
that's what a professional philosopher does. They're coming up with new things all the time. You see that, Mark? That's not secondary.
I like this idea of the improvised monologue. This is, of course, not something that we do on the show very much because we like interaction and it keeps things alive, but it's definitely a skill. perhaps.
Yeah, it's a skill, and hopefully it's not that will suddenly come out as I monopolize and turn this into a monologue. That will not happen. But it is something that can happen with philosophers wherever you find them.
Well, as
What-
we've
yeah.
we've said, Bill, we're most people, they might not think they're doing philosophy, but they might not think they're improvising, but they're definitely doing that. If you're not just reading off a script all the time, but then
For
again,
life. Mhm.
we're not literally reading off a script, but are most of us figuratively reading off a script?
In the grand scheme of things, there's nothing but scripts all the way down.
Oh wow, is that the I'm smelling a philosophy lesson.
Oh my goodness!
I'm sorry.
Please don't say that. Don't say that.
I mean, our everyday impersonal. We could put a Marcusean sort of critique of our day-to-day interactions are dominated by business transactions and things that, even though there's some improvisational wiggle room, we're trying to achieve a goal according to some sort of traditional scripts.
Well, there is a big thing in comedy theory, this whole notion of you have a context, and then there is something that's going on that is inappropriate in that context. And you have to have that baseline. These are the rules in a doctor's office. These are the rules in a bus stop. These are the rules at the bank. And as long as people follow those rules, well, then there's nothing remarkable. But it's someone who doesn't follow those rules, well, suddenly that becomes a possibility for interesting or strange or weird. And yelling and screaming in a sports field is totally fine. You're supposed to. But being quiet, you're supposed to. But at the library, if you're yelling and screaming, well, of course, then that's now absurd, in the grandest sense of the word, absurd. So there's a notion of, like, we see something that's funny and we think of this big ridiculous character. We think of the big funny person being goofy, but a tremendous amount of work goes into setting up the setting and making sure everybody understands these are the rules of this world. And you can't tell if someone violates them unless you understand them. I've been intentionally vague in what I'm in the rules and things. Just I'm so worried about dating myself. Hey, it's like The Office, a TV show that hasn't been on the air for 15 years. Remember that?
Yeah, aren't they at the reunion stage probably by
Yes,
now? Like
yes.
that 20-year
Yes.
reunion.
Just
Yeah.
say Abbott Elementary. It's the same
Yeah,
thing.
well, there we go. I've seen a few of those. They're very funny. But again, elementary schools has very distinct rules. And if we're going to make something stand out or something be strange in that reality, we have to know what that reality is. And then we can be weird.
This does seem like it is often, David, when we have a philosophy topic, which David and I did discuss, but via
Okay,
email, something in particular, we don't necessarily like to just state the thesis unless it's, somebody's book that we're defending or something. But you don't have a book on this. This is just something that you were thinking about, right, David?
That's right. It's something that I am only now beginning to think about. So it's not only something that I have not written about a book about, but it's not something that I can claim full-blown expertise on yet. But hopefully at some point, some ideas will converge into something coherent and presentable. Maybe in a couple of years.
All right. Well, is this something we want to talk about directly or explore?
I mean, I think within the next few minutes, the word will necessarily come out. But I was seeing a chance to segue from there are certain situations, certain conditions that people are in where they're less likely to follow the rules. And then once you understand, that's that kind of person. Then people understand. Then they understand. They categorize you in a certain way. Whereas maybe it might be hard to tell sometimes. Like, is that person just really eccentric, or are there external forces at work?
Okay.
Is that
that's a clue. Now you have to figure out, based on the rules of podcasting and dialogue, what the answer is to this mystery of what we're talking about.
Should we just start an improv scene and this theme will come out very, very overtly in the improv scene rather than?
Yeah, we can certainly try. And we can do that. And if you're worried, David about improv. Just realize, again, as Mark said, we've all been improvising our entire lives up until now. It's just doing that same thing. Don't be afraid to play someone who is close to yourself, who is near, who understands the world as you do, and don't feel like you have to necessarily be agreeable the whole time either. There may be things that come up that you want to push back against, but that's that. We're just gonna live in these fake little realities to the best of our ability.
Sounds like a plan to me.
Awesome. And it doesn't even need to be funny. And maybe that's a philosophy thing one of these days, Mark. This idea that truth and honesty have their own value independent of what it is you're being true and honest about. How about that? Could that be something?
Sounds good. That sounds like inspirational words.
Have anything to say about that?
Oh, we're not going to talk about the ancients yet.
Okay.
The ancients are not. They're a little relevant. Once the topic gets on the table, we can bring up the ancients. Because man, there's some ancients.
Yes.
But I mean,
yeah.
Bill, can I just start a thing, or did you?
Please go for it. I would love that, Mark. Yeah.
I really want to welcome everybody here. That I'm so glad that that you brought, Mr. Bill there.
Sure.
You brought your students and Mr. Jake and Ms. Jenny and Ms. Orange and all the rest of you, that you got everybody here, because we have a really special speaker for you today.
Great.
He's going to tell you why drugs are bad. You might have heard different things. You might have thought that they were appealing. Maybe somebody's come up to you on the street, has pulled out a really cool looking package of something, a bag of something, and you're really intrigued. And this is why we have a budget here for speakers like this. And I'm so proud to introduce our speaker. Would you like to introduce yourself, in fact?
Yeah, my name is Mr. Peter Jacobson, and I am here to talk about the dangers of drugs for spiritual development.
Come on, kids. Let's clap for him. Let's clap for them, man. Okay.
Yeah, so spiritual development. The kids are very into spiritual development. They're always talking about how they want to develop their spirit. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. This is your time. Please give your 5 to 7 minute presentation. Go.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This is my return to impromptu from high school sophomore year, where in a minute I gather my thoughts and speak for 5 to 7 minutes straight. But no, in a more serious note, I do think that there's a lot going around right now about spiritual development and about ways of altering, as William James would say, our accounts with reality. What does it mean to have a connection to the real, and how do we think about what that connection is and what reality means in the grand scheme of things, in that grand sense in which philosophers are often thought to think about reality in the deepest, most fundamental sense. And of course, in recent years, there's been a lot of discussion around the psychedelic renaissance, about ways in which psychedelics and potentially other drugs might help or enhance our ability to get in touch with ourselves and develop a more meaningful connection to reality.
Perhaps with doctors, with a doctor's care, if there's any drugs going on, right? So it's just, if a doctor gives you drugs, that's okay, right?
No. I mean,
okay.
Drugs are socially constructed. Whether they're the good-bad distinction is socially constructed. Depending on
which means you should avoid them. If you're children, you should avoid them. That's what that means. That's what that means.
Yes. If you break a leg, don't take an aspirin, kids. It's not really going to be good for your psychological well-being.
That's not. I don't think that's not. I just. Yeah, we can chat more. We can chat more. But kids. But let's just hear Mr. Jacobson out here. And
about how they're bad.
Oh, yeah,
that
of
was
course.
Kind of why you were hired, to discourage the use of drugs. It sounds like I'm glad that the 7-year-olds don't know what a psychedelic renaissance is. But yeah, please proceed.
No. But I think it has led a lot of people to start thinking about the drugs that they use, whether that's psychedelics or other intoxicants, in ways that, move away from the socially sanctioned ideas that we have about drugs. And I'm here to tell you that once you start pushing the boundaries of drug use as society dictates them, you might find that you are not the person that you thought you were. And there's a
Okay.
major risk. I mean, when
All
we
right.
talk about
Risk. Yep.
epistemological risks, which is that once you do drugs, you change who you are potentially in irreversible ways from not a physiological or chemical perspective, but from a psychological one. You know, people take psychedelics, they're atheists one day and they come out theists the day after. And it's a change that if you ask them about before they took the drugs, it's not a change that they necessarily would have wanted to undergo.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So, you know,
yeah.
you see that
Yeah.
you see the
Yep.
risk here for
There's a
becoming
risk.
otherwise than you want to be.
Imagine everybody, if you kids, if you took drugs and you woke up the next morning and suddenly you were Darth Vader. You know, suddenly you were your big brother who's a real snot, you know, that would not be a good thing, right?
Yeah, kids, stop with the lightsaber fighting.
Yeah, you're not Darth Vader. You're not Darth Vader.
Example. Not a good.
That's not a
example,
good.
Mr. Bell.
That's not generally a good thing to be Darth Vader.
Well, it depends on your view of the universe, really. But yeah, point well taken. And so yeah, I think there's a way in which once you make decisions that lead to an alteration of your identity, it's very difficult to think about what your responsibility is in connection to that decision, and also how to think about it before and after the fact. So there is a question here of time that's very tricky and from a philosophical and a psychological perspective. Because even if you become somebody that you wouldn't have wanted to become, once you become that person, you no longer see it as a loss. You just see it as the new reality of who you are and come to embrace it. So it does create a bit of a split in your sense of self over time, depending, of course, on the experience.
Sure. I guess it would be like I know some of you kids will be going to middle school next year. And you might be thinking, hey, it's a new school. You can be somebody new. You can maybe dress differently. It's an opportunity to kind of change yourself and meet new people. I think that could be, and
yeah,
drugs would be bad.
Yeah, you know, this would be the version of that.
Okay.
You put on you put on a black t-shirt, the next day you're a goth.
Yeah,
there's just no coming back from that.
That just shows kids, yes, you can undergo these changes naturally. That you can worry about. I mean, there are definite dress codes about what kind of t-shirts we allow in the school, but if you want to wear a black t-shirt, that's totally okay.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And now
those
those would be the changes that are exterior to yourself. That if you woke up the next day and said, you know what, I don't think I want to wear a black t-shirt today. Well, you could change that back. Okay. All right. But then there's some other changes. I know some of you are probably starting to have some, well, the health teacher talked about some other changes, and those are going to be also irreversible changes, you know, well, we'll save that for health class, but those changes should be knocking on your door real soon.
And those, even though the doctor has not actually prescribed those changes, they're recognized as natural. So that's okay. If there are drugs that are relevant to your particular situation, we don't know, you know, it's between you and your parents and your doctor. If there's certain drugs that you want to change some way or another, that might even be irreversible. As far as I'm not actually allowed to address that, you know, according to the school board, but personally, let's just say don't use LSD to do that.
I think that's fine. And you may not know what LSD is. Don't worry about it. If you don't know what it is, well, then that's a win. If you don't mind, Mr. Jacobson, I had the kids write down some questions, and maybe you could field some of these questions for the kids about drug use. Is that okay?
Of course. That's what I'm here for, to tell people not to do drugs.
There we go. Okay, there it is. It was a long road to get there, and I appreciate the thorough academic rigor there, but okay. Well, one kid wrote, is it okay for mom to have a glass of wine with dinner?
Yes. Full
Okay, that
stop.
won't change. Will that turn her into
Let
somebody
mommy
else?
have her juice. I
Okay.
think she needs it.
Okay.
She probably has a prescription for an evening drink and a morning drink and a late night drink. And you can help mom by bringing her
Okay.
a little snack to go with her medicine.
And that would change her to someone calm.
Depending on what the medicine is made of, it will typically turn her into somebody who is calm,
Merlot.
more
Merlot. It's
relaxed.
Merlot.
Oh, it's Merlot, then yes, it will turn mom into a relaxed, cool mom who's going to be cool with your goth face in school.
Because your mom's doctor has said it's okay for her to have that amount of that liquid. Don't do this yourself. You will, if you're a little anxious, you go to your mom, your doctor. Don't just take the Merlot yourself, kids.
Next question here. I love the smell of coffee. When is it okay for kids to drink coffee? Because apparently they understand that coffee is a drug, or there's a drug in coffee.
Well, I am against drugs, but coffee is food. And coffee, like all foods, gives you energy. And so it's okay to have more energy once you start reaching an age at which your metabolism requires more energy to do more work. So I would say in your teenage years, you can begin a little taste of coffee, and then later you can make your own decisions about whether you want to go down that route.
Yeah, that can be. Speaking from personal experience, I'll let you know that coffee can get expensive. It can become a very expensive habit. You go from $2 here at the 7-Eleven, and next thing you know, you're drinking 28-ounce jugs from some of the larger vendors. Then you're buying a machine for your house. It can add up quick. Let me just say that from my own experience.
That's right. And caffeine can be dangerous. That's an important point to keep in mind. There is a saying among people who work on drugs, and that is that it is the dose that makes the poison. And so you might sometimes think that a particular substance is okay to drink because a lot of people do it. But if you happen to get the wrong dose and you consume more than you intended or knew you should consume, you can get into real trouble health-wise. People have died from caffeine consumption.
Well, mommy and daddy won't. Mommy and daddy will be fine. They know how to. Okay.
Yeah, and kids, I know sometimes your parents might say not so much sugar because you're getting too hyper. That's sort of a similar thing. You want to only get the doctor prescribed amount of sugar. Probably your dentist has told you don't have sugar all the time. Your teeth will fall right out of your head. You don't know what's going to happen. It's a dangerous drug.
Yeah, so the sugar, usually okay. Caffeine for moms and dads, also usually okay. If you're thinking about dipping your hand into the drawer in the kitchen that you don't know anything about, best stay away and wait for mom and dad to tell you what you can and cannot consume.
Okay, kids, we're going to go ahead and cut you loose for recess. Feel free to head on out of the room here. I'm going to stay here with our guest and make sure he can find his way out and everything.
Yeah.
And
whose name was what?
Mr. Jacobson, I believe.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And have fun at recess, everybody.
Now, I know you'd asked Mr. Jacobson to have them each take one of these mushrooms on the way out, but we've decided against that. Just so you know.
When you said, I gotta say, when I was in college, we went through a phase where we could sneak up onto the roof of the art museum and just like, is that boy gone? We'd smoke tremendous amounts of marijuana up on the, is that kid gone? Is he gone? Is that what you're telling me?
I don't know. I thought you were going to say that you ate a lot of sugar and candy, and I was about to reprimand you for that.
Well, the kids are gone. The kids are out. We're in recess.
Who knows where that kid is now? Really unclear.
Okay.
I mean, I know after I ate enough sugar, like I'm no longer that child that ate all that sugar. Like after years and years and years of doing that, I don't even look the same as that child.
Yeah, I think you do change as a result of consuming things that get classified as drugs. I really do. I think there are real profound changes that happen that you then have this task of trying to reconcile who you are now with who you were before. And it's almost like an accelerated process of aging that's just condensed into a short period of time.
Nuts.
But people talk about this more so in connection to psychedelics, where people's beliefs are involved. Like smoking weed is not really going to change your view of the universe, probably.
Well, some of them were laced with PCP and
yes, and so it's the PCP that's doing the work there.
Okay, that was
and so when you're thinking about drugs that lead you to say yes and no to questions in different ways than you would have before, that's where you get this risk.
Yes or no to swimming naked in the fountain on campus? Is that a
yeah, or yes or no to, am I the kind of person that's going to swim naked in that fountain? And then you say, well, I always thought it was a no. Today it's a definite yes for me, and I kind of like that guy. That's where you get that shift in personality.
Right. I had originally seen drugs as maybe a way of saying no to authority, that I want to assert my independence. But then I realized that I could do other things that were antisocial, like join the local improv troupe. And that would be just spitting in the face of anybody that wanted me to become a doctor, to walk the straight and narrow, to fit in a little box. You don't have to use drugs.
Those guys pull no punches when they hold up that mirror to society. Let me just say that right now.
The improv guys?
Yeah. Sometimes it's hard to look into that mirror and see society, and see yourself. I'm just going to say that right now.
You're forever changed.
But look, here's the thing. How aged is my brain? What's going to happen to me? Is it over? Am I dead? Am I gonna get Alzheimer's at 50? What's happening?
Yeah. Early onset death. Is that the risk down the hatch? I don't think so. No. I mean, the analogy to aging is very weak. But what I'm talking about here is ways in which we can do various kinds of substances that are intoxicating, that are stimulants, that are narcotics, and especially the ones that are psychoactive. I really kind of want to focus on those for the purpose of this discussion, where your interpretation of your place in the universe is suddenly up for grabs, where your belief in supra or supernatural forces suddenly shifts in a direction that was unexpected. And that leads other people to tell you, wow, you have changed in ways that I don't know how to make sense of, especially your loved ones and your families.
Okay.
And so I think that's the kind of quote unquote aging that I'm talking about, but it's really just a pivot in your worldview.
Okay. Yeah, we were on the roof one time and Tammy Walters took her shirt off. I saw God. We were so fried on everything. I don't know. It was just this light that came out of her skin. I couldn't even see anything that I thought I would see. It was just light.
I mean, that's some kind of evolution, but if you can see God not only in things that society traditionally views as beautiful, but in the ugliness, that God is in everything. God is in the nasty, just the saggy, the whatever kind of aesthetic does not float your boat.
We can be done, Mark. We can be done.
I was thinking that this might actually be the first improv scene that just goes into an actual conversation with no formally stopping of the scene.
It got real close to something that I really do want to make sure we talk about, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, David. This notion of that I've heard more and more of people who have PTSD or behavioral disorders, that like perhaps there are some psychedelics that are helping people with clinical depression or with other generally socially considered bad conditions to help overcome those things. Is it similar, or is that where we're going at? Is that in this same ballpark?
I would say it's in the same ballpark because I think one of the appeals of psychedelics in the last 20 to 30 years, of course, is precisely that we have come to realize that they have these staggering effects that pharmaceuticals are nowhere near when it comes to certain conditions like substance use disorders, eating disorders, also in helping people not of course, this would be incoherent, not overcome the fact that they're going to die, but come to terms and develop a peaceful relationship to the inevitability of their death, especially when we're talking about patients with terminal cancer and things like that. And so there's something that these drugs do, not just to the brain, but to the mind or to the human spirit, that brings about a kind of realignment of the self in ways that we are only now beginning to explore. And that raises really fascinating questions about just the relationship between matter and spirituality, because how paradoxical and somewhat bizarre is it that now the medically recommended treatment for some of these conditions based on empirical scientific data is a form of mysticism, right? It's almost as if suddenly your hardcore scientist is telling you that if you want to make some progress in connection to this, maybe it's time to, quote unquote, see God through these psychedelics, whether that's a transcendental God or, you know, the God of the small details. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Is there a sharp distinction between what counts as a drug and what counts as a chemical that is being absorbed by the body, but we would not call a drug? So, you know, taking insulin, that is something that the body should be manufacturing. You're a little low on it. We're giving you some extra insulin.
Serotonin. People
yes,
talk, you know,
typically, right. Or this is why sugar was a good borderline case. Or, and if that's not, doesn't count as a drug, even though it, I don't know what the chemical is exactly that is making you hyper. But then, you know, caffeine, not something that we naturally manufacture, but is certainly we have a potency within our systems to react to this chemical. So does that not in itself say, right? So you could say, oh, these psychedelics, they're all natural. This is part of the way that we would be in touch with nature. You know, the ancestors, the people that used to live on this land, they would take psychedelics all the time. These naturally growing mushrooms, they're just part of a diet. They are food, literally. And, you know, part of, they should, it is a merely historical contingency that we consider them now out of the ordinary.
So I think I would land somewhere in the middle there, because the distinction between drug, food, and even toxin, for example, there's something biological to some of those distinctions, but in general, it tends to be social. So we talk about drugs as substances that we ingest that can have sometimes adverse effects or medically targeted positive effects, right? So you take a drug for a benefit. And there we talk about addiction as continuing to take a particular drug, even when that consumption is having long-lasting adverse effects on your life, right? This is the difference between substance use and substance abuse, that you just keep doing it, even though it's making your life worse, all things considered. But I do think that the distinction is arbitrary. First, because historically, from a cultural and an evolutionary perspective, drugs have what we now call drugs were not called that before and were not seen as that. They really were, as I mentioned earlier, they were forms of food, you know, superfoods that just give you a special kind of energy. And that can be an energy either for hunting for a longer period of time if you're chewing leaves with nicotine or caffeine, or foods that give you a spiritual power to get in touch with another reality. And that's, I think, how a lot of indigenous communities continue to see drugs, not as these things that fall into nature from some other realm, but as part of the natural world. They're plants. Sometimes they're also animals. Animals can be psychedelic themselves, but it's just things from nature that we ingest. And that's the most simple definition of food.
Yeah.
I mean, I
yeah.
naturally lick toads. I just, they're
Yes.
just all over the place. How can you not?
You'll eventually find a toad, Mark, that'll set you going.
Yeah, I prefer the puffer fish. I just go
Okay.
scuba diving, hunting for puffer fish, and chomping on them. Except I don't actually consume them because I am not a meat eater. I just kiss them gently in a psychedelic embrace.
Yeah. Now, do you think that I have heard someone, again, you hear all kinds of stories in college and things, and someone said, "Oh, LSD, all it does, it just makes the blood vessels in your eyes dilate in unpredictable ways, in ways your brain can't control, and it just makes you see things. It's not necessarily, and again, who knows if this is correct or not. It's not changing your brain. It's just messing with your perception in the same way a hall of mirrors might mess with your perception, or a scary movie or a fun house. It's just it's not changing your. Now, certainly, having had a bad experience in a hall of mirrors, it may change somebody. But do you think what's going on is no, it is changing your brain, or is it merely changing how you perceive the world, and that perception is changing your brain? Does that distinction make sense?
It does. So I take it that you're asking whether it just has an impact on your perception
Yeah.
versus more cognitive,
Yeah.
like deeper psychological parts of your personality.
Has that debate been settled?
Yeah, I mean, I think by now you can say to that, I mean, we know that friend has not done LSD. If that's their perception, that it just makes you see things,
Sure.
either they just microdose once, or and they've never actually tripped on it.
Yeah.
But by now, I think we have pretty good evidence to say that something more than just tweaking your perception or your vision, like a kaleidoscope, is going on here, because what a lot of these drugs do beyond affect your sensory organs and your receptivity to the world is that they alter also your sense of self, literally where you sense the boundaries of your body to be. People report all sorts of distortions in their body schema. Your emotional profile also changes. You attribute mental states to things that are sometimes not even animated or living. You start having a conversation with the rock.
Yeah.
And so some of these, of course, are ephemeral effects that go away, but they also become a window into our own emotional lives. When you have a trip, you confront yourself. And it's a kind of spiritual or psychological test where you get to see sides of yourself that maybe you didn't even know were there. And this is something I've talked about in a different setting. It's what happened to me when I first had a full-blown day-long trip on magic mushrooms. I had a terrible trip. It was a bad trip by any objective standard definition of what that is. And I walked away from that kind of transformed in my self-interpretation.
Sure.
David is a little darker inside than I realized David was, and then I had to sit with that knowledge it unsettled me for weeks and weeks and weeks, maybe even months.
Wow.
And that's not an uncommon experience.
This stressing the it's just a continuum, and there's things, why is this considered a drug and that's considered a drug. You might do that to justify drugs, but you could also do that coming at it from the other angle of what are things that I can do that are like drugs, or and then you can say, what, that's your drug. Gambling is your drug. It's because it produces the serotonin or whatever the addictive chemical is that it's going to have. There's a reason why there's addictions in certain behaviors, like addictions to drugs, that they involve chemical changes. Or likewise, like I want to see the depths of my soul. I want to, so I'm just gonna spend 3 weeks reading Hegel's Logic, and if I don't come out of that seeing something different, then the world has failed.
No, so there are a lot of things that have that quality, right? Of having drug-like effects. You can get that like the drug level high with meditation. You can get it with sports activity. You can get it with hypnosis, very similar modifications of your perception and relationship to the world. And even within drugs, our understanding, for example, of something like dopamine has changed in recent years, because for a long time we talked about dopamine, and so this would apply to dopaminergic drugs in particular that target the dopamine system. We used to think that it was about pleasure, that dopamine, every dopamine hit is just feels good, feels good, feels good. Now we understand that it's less about liking than about it wanting it. So it's not really that it feels good, it's that it makes us want it even when it doesn't feel good, which is at the root of addictive behaviors. And we also know that you can get addicted to things that are very bizarre, and that don't even really change your sensory experience of the world, such that not all addictions, even of drugs, entail that original high in the first place. So the case that has been discussed most as an illustration of this is the case of anabolic steroids. People who go to the gym and they get genuinely addicted to steroids. It's not because you get a high on steroids. It's an entirely different mechanism that has to do with self-body image, and with wanting to be seen as hot and desirable. And so that's a case of addiction to something that never even felt good in the first place, right? It didn't even give you the high, and it still has this potential addictive downside. So it's a whole spectrum of possibilities.
Well, I
Well, if
wish I
you-
could remember the guy's name now, but I just we'll have to find it, Mark. Maybe he can be a guest. He may be too big for a guest on our show. I don't know, but he had this whole
Don't
thing.
say that in front of a guest.
No,
No
sorry,
one's
sorry,
bigger than
never.
David.
I mean, it depends on who. I want to hear the name before I get upset or happy.
Yeah,
It's that Timothy
Yeah,
Leary
yeah.
fellow, isn't it?
Yeah.
You keep
Oh,
talking about it, inviting
yeah.
that Timothy Leary fellow.
Dame Helen
It would have to be the
Mirren.
ghost.
It was, yes.
Fair
Helen
enough.
Mirren.
Point well taken.
But it's this idea that we didn't evolve to be healthy. And the idea of like, we're not, yes, what would be good for me? It's like, no, we just evolved to procreate and do what we need to do to keep the species going, and a little bit extra and do something. But like this idea that bad habits or unhealthy habits we're not sick. That's just we shouldn't.
So we only need to make it to like 17 years old. Is that what you're saying? You like do a
Well,
bunch of
25.
procreating.
We got to raise the
check
children.
out.
Yeah.
Live fast, die young. No, I mean, I think this raises a really good and important point, which is that in debates about drugs, we often moralize about health. And we moralize about health, whether it's from an evolutionary perspective, we are supposed to, for evolutionary reasons, make healthy choices, or from a moral perspective, because if you don't make healthy choices and protect your health, somehow it reflects failure in your moral fiber.
You're a bad person.
You're a bad person. And I really resist both of those understandings of health. I don't think we exist to be healthy, putting aside the fact that the category of health is deeply problematic and contested. But even from a moral perspective, I don't think I owe anybody me being healthy. So we can talk about something akin to a right, and this is putting it somewhat polemically, something akin to a right to self-destruction and to self-medication, and a right to push to the limits of my own experience if I want to, as long, of course, as that doesn't impinge on the rights and freedoms of other people. And you see this like with the most clarity in fat phobic discussions about health and sugar, right? Where the idea is that people who are bigger or people who identify as fat somehow are violating the social contract because they're not contributing their health to the public, as if you were somehow, let's say, disrespecting yourself by making choices that make other people uncomfortable around you for superficial reasons. And so, yes, I actually think that if anything, from an evolutionary perspective, and this is what I might write about in connection to drugs, I think if anything, we can speak of an instinct for experimentation that is at the root of animal life, where we and other animals like to push the envelope of experience and seek these experiences of intensity just because there is value in novelty from an organism's perspective. And that intensity can come from intense physical activity like sports, but it also can come from eating plants that make you feel a little funny.
Well, that Biden, if he wins again, all the kids will be forced to eat magic mushrooms, and he's promised everybody a right to marijuana. It's just disgraceful.
Well, sign me up for the ballot booth.
As an improv scene, was there anything that came out of that bill that you wanted to comment on?
Well, it's kind of funny because we mentioned monologuing earlier, and I guess we plowed through our time here. This idea of monologues can actually be a very helpful way to learn a lot about somebody and learn who they are. There's a reason why plays and books and movies feature monologues. I think the bad word of it, again, talk about breaking a social norm, is when someone is hogging the conversation via monologue. That is bad. However, if we are allowing someone to monologue, we want someone to monologue. Perhaps it's a noble professor or someone we esteem, or a minister, or someone that we please monologue. Well, then that's actually a really powerful tool, especially if it's well considered and done well. And you actually had some monologues in there that told me a ton about the kind of person you are. This whole idea, especially if we're giving a speech to kids about drug use, you kind of playing both sides of it, which is the last thing parents and teachers.
I couldn't hold it.
Well, that's funny. Again,
hold.
the context is a childhood, say no to drugs. Let's keep this simple. Let's, and you violated that context, and that's why it's funny, and that's why the humor is. But we're going to get that very well through your long, extended monologues, is where we're going to get that.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also another connection here, which is that to drugs specifically, which is that drugs make us often loquacious, whether we are in connection to others, but often also in connection to ourselves. We start talking to ourselves and having full-on monologues, even in the absence of an interlocutor. And some people have suggested that this kind of accentuation or intensification of the rhetorical dimension of human experience, it has a semi-therapeutical function that, sometimes in just talking, even if there's nobody around, you work through difficult issues and get the pleasure of externalizing things that were previously purely internal.
Well, I've had a few rounds of morphine after being in the hospital for various kidney stones and surgeries, and other times. And talk about loquacious. I get real chatty when I'm on morphine.
Did you
and
record
I think
it? Can we post some of it?
We want to do that scene. What we want? I never recorded it, but
turn that phone on, man.
But surely you remember.
Well, it's that whole thing. I think it's this whole notion of, I think if I were to get into hardcore drugs, I would definitely be heroin like that. I would definitely be a junkie. Should I go down that? Because I think it's a whole notion, and again, of quieting. I would say quieting the world or quieting society, but that's inside myself, my own perceptions of what is expected of me and what is appropriate, what's inappropriate, what I should or shouldn't be doing. And for many people, that is very loud and causes internal strife and and having a kidney stone and back surgery and being looped out was a great way of turning off all that, even just for the few hours.
Yeah, I mean, different drugs will obviously have different effects, right?
Certainly.
Some drugs will be depressives; they will calm you down. But there are other drugs that really turn on the chatty button. And when that is combined with a disinhibition of ego boundaries, or a lowering of ego boundaries and a disinhibition of the self, then you have this outpouring of thoughts and ideas that not only were you holding in, but that you didn't know you were holding in. And that's when there is the possibility of self-discovery in ways that bring about that kind of pivoting of the worldview that I described earlier. And that's happened to me certainly with alcohol. It's happened to me with marijuana, and it has happened to me with psilocybin.
Should I try to get more kidney stones? Is that what you're saying?
Only after you
stop
talk to
drinking
them,
water.
only after you animize them while on a mushroom trip.
Okay.
That's how you select them.
I've tried licking kidney stones. It does nothing for me.
Coffee in the morning, a Coca-Cola at night, no water in between. That's it. Just sit back and wait.
I was very early scared straight, and so I've been very, very wimpy about my substance intake. But I feel like I have an addictive personality, and I pursue the music, other artistic. And one of the things about doing this podcast is I feel like, okay, on the Partially Examined Life, on these other places, I'm trying to make sense. I'm trying, there's a very goal focused thing, but just being in a situation where you're encouraged, it's not that there are no guidelines to what you should say next, but that it can be tweaked, so your 5 to 7 minute monologues as a you were trying to argue a particular point, right? This was for debate, right? You're trying to come up with the best argument you can for this. So that's comparable to, let's explain Hegel's phenomenology in the next 5 minutes, trying to be coherent. But when you lift those guardrails, and I don't know why I'm saying this next thing exactly, what is the purpose? Then it at least can introduce a feeling that's not terribly unlike the other pseudo drug experience. I come out of just watching Naked Lunch, and the whole world looks different to me.
The whole world looks too clothed.
And everything feels faintly wrong. I mean, that is many cinematic experiences. I mean, that's the whole point of the theater, the thing that's being lost, that, you're just watching from home and you can pause and get snacks all the time, is being completely immersed in whatever mood that the filmmaker's trying to get you in by relentlessly throwing music and people chanting and staring at you and doing weird. And then if that doesn't affect you, then something's wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, the term intoxication, of course, now we associated with chemicals in the body, but the term has been used throughout history for other experiences that are ecstatic in nature, that bring you outside of yourself. So people talk about very much the ecstatic quality of strenuous physical activity. This is I've had the runner's high a couple of times, and the first time I had it, I was truly fascinated by just the phenomenology of feeling that I was floating with zero effort, and at like a moderate speed, but still the physiological and phenomenological effect was unsettling, but also very attractive. And it's a term that we use for talking about religious experiences. When people make a connection to whatever it is that they consider the divine, it pulls them out of themselves in the same way that art, the theater, a piece of whatever piece of art you might prefer, can also do that for you. And I think that's why when you read about contemporary research in altered states of consciousness, one of the first things that we notice is the vast variety of things that are under discussion. It's art, it's music, it's sports, it's meditation, it's hypnosis, it's drugs, it's intoxicants, and sometimes even mundane things like sitting down and focusing on your emotions for a minute can have a version of that effect. And so, yeah, you're right that lots of things can bring this about. So some of them have less of a risk of addiction. And that's a real danger, of course, when we're talking about drugs specifically.
Do you want to start us on a final improv journey here in the next before we wrap up?
Sure. Okay, here's the thing, you guys. Here's the thing, Mr. Mr. Walters came into work late today and he looks horrible. I think he may have slept in his car. He smelled like booze and just went straight to his office and slammed the door. I don't know how we want to handle this thing. I don't know if we want to try to, talk him down. I don't know if we want to leave him be, but there's some materials and presentations and things that he needs to be a part of that we need to get from him, and that's I don't know who wants to go in there, who wants to or not go in there.
Well, I am Mr. Peterson, and I represent my client. I am a lawyer, your employee, and I am here to tell you that you are not legally allowed to do any action because he is not, in fact, intoxicated or presenting a danger to other people. He's just pursuing the latest trend in microdosing as recommended by the standards of your industry in order to be more productive and more innovative at work.
He's wearing the same clothes he had on yesterday. That's more productive. That's what we're saying.
It's recommended by the high gurus of the techno world in Silicon Valley. Yes.
Hey, you guys talking about me? Are you talking to my lawyer?
Oh, Mr. Walters. Yeah. I just wanted to. Well, we've got that. Saw you coming in. Can I get you a coffee? Would that help?
Ask my lawyer. You should. I refer all the questions to my lawyer about.
Should we get him a coffee?
Thank you, Mr. Walters. And this meeting is being recorded with evidence of Mr. Walters' employer offering yet another drug, further supporting the claim that if there is a problem of addiction, it was instantiated and caused by the work environment that already promotes a drug culture, even in the presence of representatives of the court.
I think that's a little much. You brought your attorney to work? You brought your attorney to the office?
Those coffees you've been bringing in I was fine with like Folgers, but then you keep bringing in these high-powered beans from Peru. How am I gonna resist that? How am I gonna retain my sense of self in the face of those kinds of trends?
We all, it's just a Keurig machine. We all drink it. I thought everyone would enjoy decent coffee for it other than Folgers crystals.
He's telling me to drink the Kool-Aid. He's saying everybody's doing it.
I take it that you do not know that the U.S. Department of Commerce has established that beans from Peru were recently infected by a psychedelic fungus. And so without knowing, potentially, you may have exposed my client to an addictive substance that has ruined his life and has led him to become a follower of ideologies coming out of Silicon Valley about increasing productivity in the workplace through microdosing that are not consistent with his previous desires.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to call your wife, Mr. Walters, and see if she agrees with this. Because I think you're having a fight with her, and I think she's kicked you out of the house. That's what everything. Using my knowledge, sleeping in the car, smelling like you smell. That's how about that? How about we get a third opinion on this here? How does that sound?
Last time I went home, my wife she was like a giant snake, something, but it seemed fine. She was perfectly civil to me.
She was a giant snake thing.
Well, this is a good time to inform you, Mr. Walters, that I am also legally representing your wife in your divorce case, and I plan to use this as evidence of an unhealthy domestic environment and emotional abuse by comparing her to reptiles in front of her
clearly
colleagues.
A conflict of interest. It was clearly a conflict of interest.
It was just physical. I'm not saying she was perfectly cordial to me, and I think we're on good terms. It's just I was a little blown by the fact that there was a giant snake there on the big mushroom that was our bed. And that then when I went into the bathroom, it's like there was lichen running up the walls. And then I could look up into the vast heavens it was a little much.
Okay.
I think your wife would agree that it was a little much.
Yeah, can we just one of these social constructs that is so oppressive is I need a job. Okay. I can't tell my landlord rent is a social construct. Okay. And
I'm
in order to keep my job, we've got a big presentation tomorrow. Mr.
I'm
Walters.
ready. I'm ready for the do you want to hear the
Oh.
presentation in a 5 to 7 minute monologue?
With slides? We got a deck for this presentation?
I mean, the slides make it like 25 minutes. I would just give you the short version because the slides, people like to look at the slides.
Sure. I would. And if for some reason you can't make it through 5 to 7 minutes coherently, I say maybe you just take a day and let the rest of the team and we'll go ahead and just get it done.
I think you might need the slides. Let me let me just get the PowerPoint, the thing going. Do you know where the remote is to the thing?
In your hand. It's in your left hand.
Okay. All right. So this slide, you see the swirling colors, and they make you want to buy things, and they make you appreciate quality and how our company is at the top of its field. It's like we expand your mind to appreciate the greatness of our products, which are
appliances, GE appliances.
GE appliances. Machines. You might think that GE, you think GE, you think G.
You think GE says they're so good. They're hallucinatorily good, these appliances.
In the next slide, you see how there's like the ancient man, and then it goes to the modern man, and then a blender. It's like the progression, the evolution. It's like we're all becoming part of the machine. And then once we're part of the machine, we realize that it's all been machines all the way down. And then we reach out and we break the machines. And then we have to buy new machines. So this is about planned obsolescence and really increasing productivity over the long term, not just the short term. But, if we could get the audience, get the consumer to see the everyday appliances that they have now is inherently oppressive, then they will want to transcend those and buy the new line, which is at least 20% more power efficient.
Well, the shareholders will like that part. Everything, the first 4 minutes were rambly. The last 30 seconds really sank the nail. Maybe we can start there. Huh? Maybe we just give them the last slide, and we'll just start with that, huh?
I have to confer with counsel. I mean, can we just? I think we should make him take the whole thing. I don't think that we should just let him just take the last slide. I think that's a violation of my integrity.
Yeah, you have to choose. You take everything, or you take nothing, or we take you to court.
Take me to court.
Those are the only 3 choices.
I really don't think that's true. I really don't think that's true. Yeah,
okay. That's fine.
I love that attorney, David. I love that. Oh,
many hats of the attorney. Yes, much better than the school speaker.
Well, it's that the authority that, and I have not met this person a lot, but is that because I speak with authority and have some legalese or whatnot, I can jam my agenda down your throat. And it's the person who's done a lot of therapy and knows all the buzzwords and knows all of the things can win every argument because they know exactly what to say to make their partner. If you had just reflected more, then you would know that you were an idiot. It's like,
what's really awful is that this character came so natural to me on the spot that I'm the one trying to keep kids away from potentially addicting behaviors. That's the real, the real indicator that I've learned.
Yeah, you want to talk about the subtleties. You don't want to give clear, unambiguous warnings to children. You want to get into the philosophy of it with them.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I would be the worst public school, elementary school motivational speaker. I would bring my own coffee beans from Peru, probably.
Don't say gay, but do say the social construction of gender and preference, and get into the, you know, bring in some Foucault. But as long as you don't say the word gay, you know, then you're fine in Florida
you know,
schools.
the kids are right there these days. They won't use gay, but they will lecture me on Foucault. So I think I would fit right in.
Bill, was there anything in that scene, or we don't know yet your lesson? You know that the philosophy thing was drugs. I think that became clear very quickly. But from the improv scene, I feel like, you know, we've talked about a few different things about the monologues and about, but was there a thing that you brought in?
It was going to be monologuing, which is hilarious. And we have these things where Mark and I will have these kismet kind of stars lining up situations. Now, part of that, I think, is that the inherent flexibility in both philosophy and improv, that we can, like, hey, look, these pieces fit together after all, because there's some wiggle room in both those things. But when I had you give your little speech, I was trying to get you to just like blast out, you know, give that presentation. That was great, Mark, about just like, that's exactly who this person is. The audience is like, that's exactly the kind of thing you expect we'd expect them to say, and that very turn towards formal business speak at the end was very fun as well. But we're not going to get that turn towards formal business speak without several minutes of psychedelic rambling. So that was cool. Yeah.
All right. Well, any final thoughts about the philosophy in terms of focusing this laser into a thesis? There's lots of issues that we brought up, and including, you know, what we were sharing by email before we started this, of why drugs are so interesting, and it's their relation to the self, and how you referred to, you know, another podcast was talking about being a vampire. It's the same way, you know, once you're bitten by the vampire, then you're, you know, it's a one-way change. And we got into that a little in the first scene of these other one-way changes. Like, well, is puberty's a one-way change? Like, is there something pernicious about that? Like the fact that you can't choose it, or unless you're, you know, maybe on hormones, then it can go some other way. Anyway, it raises too many issues, the drugs issues. It's a Pandora's box of issues for me, philosophically. Was there a final statement that you had to make to sort of what you would like people to take away from this discussion?
Yeah, certainly. I think, especially in connection to what you said about the kind of change that sometimes can happen with the ingestion of drugs, it's a change that first and foremost you choose, and so that can bring a sense of responsibility for the consequences that's difficult to tease apart. But it's also a change that's not just a once you do it, it's done kind of thing. It's a change that you can restart over and over again, such that it takes you in ever new directions. And so it gives us a sense of agency and control over the boundaries of our own subjectivity, so that you feel as if you're experimenting with your very self over the course of testing the boundaries of what your body takes in. And so it can be either a one-time thing for people who only do it that one time, but it also can be a constant process of self-encountering and self-change. And I find that really fascinating, just because philosophers care so much about the self and about experience, that we have these tools and laboratories for experimenting with the self. And, you know, some of them are just drugs.
Okay.
Well, I like to deny that my left heel is mine, and I sort of conditioned myself to just really externalize and take the boundaries of myself just to exclude that left heel, and then I can shoot it full of heroin all the time, and I'm not taking it myself.
It's not you.
Yeah. I'm giving heroin to I call him Frankie the heel.
Nancy Reagan would be so proud.
I think Nancy Reagan the Heel. That would be better than Frankie the Heel.
Nancy Reagan the Heel. Oh no.
I think we have an episode title.
Yes.
Nancy Reagan the Heel, featuring David Pena Guzman. I like the sound of that.
Thank you so much for joining us. I guess, yeah, we reached the point. Philosophy versus improv, which, David, as the guest of honor, you kind of get to decide whether what we've said will greatly affect the world most, I mean, monumentally with both fields, but based on the things that you're putting together about drugs here and the things we've stumbled across versus the whole new world of improv that you've stumbled across, what is your thought of the winner of today's match?
I think the winner today was the monologue for sure. The figure of the monologue was the winner. And I think the improv, for me, it's not something that I run into very often. So I'm gonna side on the side of the new, just like we are evolutionarily pre-programmed to do, according to my theory of drug use.
Okay.
All right.
So we're learning that philosophers are generous when they vote for improv, and improvisers are usually selfish when they also vote for improv. That's what
But that's only been happening in the last 7 weeks or so.
Several
Before
weeks, yeah.
that, it was about 50-50. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to argue against the trend.
I did really like that lawyer character. That was very frustrating, and frustration is the key to so much humor. And it's not we see things and it's someone getting mad. They're really getting frustrated, and there's a subtle but consequential difference between anger and frustration. And that'd be my challenge if you're watching things that are humorous and see people getting angry. It's like, no, they're really getting frustrated. The world doesn't have to go the way it's going, and they are caught in it, and it could so easily go in their favor, but it doesn't. It goes against them, and that is so frustrating, and drives so much humor. There's my challenge to you.
All right. Hey, plug your podcast before we leave. I should have had you do that at the beginning.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, if people want to get in contact with me, I do have a podcast of my own, which is called Overthink Podcast. It's a philosophy project in which me and my collaborator and co-host Ellie Anderson, who is another philosopher, we take ideas from philosophy, we take concepts and problematics and apply them to everyday life in a non-monologue but dialogue format. So there it's 2 as opposed to 3, but we do try to keep it also light and accessible to the public.
Yes, lots of very good topics that we should steal for this podcast, and some very good guests.
You'll have to speak to my lawyer.
Do not.
I've copyrighted the topic of drugs. You better not cover drugs on your show, or we're coming for you. All right. Well, I've learned a lot from both of you today. Thanks so much.
Learned a lot from both of y'all.
Bye-bye.
And see.
I should sell my soul. Bankrupt. Bankrupt.